Hey everybody, welcome back to VideoMess. So, today we're continuing the series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and I know we said that development was done on the standard Nintendo 64 core, but Robert FPGAZumSpass just released yesterday a new update to the Turbo core. And the funniest thing was, he said he was going to take a 2-week vacation, so we now know he might be an excellent core developer, but he's pretty bad at actually walking away from work. All jokes aside, we have a new Turbo core. It improves basically everything, and it's an absolute blast. We're going to be talking about it today. And right off the top, GoldenEye is a game that everyone would probably want to see tested, and one that on stock Nintendo 64 hardware definitely chugs and drops frames. When this game came out in the 90s, it was absolutely mind-blowingly impressive, and no one had an issue whatsoever about losing frames back then. We were just happy to see games in 3D on a home console. But of course, in 2024, we want to improve performance. So this is upclocking basically everything on the Nintendo 64 to get more performance, more frames, and a smoother cadence out of the overall FPGA core. Now before you ask, no, I am not putting a frame counter in the top left hand corner. I want you to look at how the footage moves, the flow, the motion, the vibe, and the screen cadence. I think that's a lot more important than just trying to focus on a numerical value. But trust me, the frame rates are improved. And outside of one test, we're just using these stock ROMs as well. There's performance patches all across the board that'll do even better, and I will do a part 2 basically giving it every single advantage possible. But for the first test, I wanted to just do this based upon the original game files. And to say the Turbo core improved so many things would be an understatement, especially in some of the later tests later in the video. It basically makes games I would consider almost unplayable to be totally playable, and that's always a fun time. Now just be aware, this is not going to be a supported core. If you find bugs in it, if something breaks, that is how it's going to be. This is just a for funsies, for lack of a better term, playing around with the code. Robert just wanted to throw that extra Turbo core out there, and we all should be happy to get it. And as we move around the world of GoldenEye here, everything is just so much smoother. Every single level, you're getting more frames, you're getting better performance. That's also going to aid in the control as well, because when the frames drop and everything got sluggish, trying to actually aim in this game on a stock Nintendo 64 or the standard Nintendo 64 core becomes more difficult. This is just going to make so many more games so much more fun, and that is the fun thing, because there's plenty of horsepower on the DE10 Nano board to do stuff like this, to up the clock speeds on all of the hardware, or in this instance upping the clock speeds in the FPGA core. And as all of these enemies come in, the frame rate persists to be very smooth. This is where on real hardware or on the stock speed core, you're going to see the frame rates dip and in some instances get to a very slideshow like territory. On the Turbo core, that's just not going to happen, and this is even improved off the previous Turbo core that came out around Christmas 2023. Every once in a while you can still drop the frame rate because explosions are going to be processing a lot of effects, but otherwise this is just so much better. It makes a game that is fun just be that much more fun. That's what the Turbo core provides to you, a better, newer experience on games you know, love, and remember. And we'll shoot dude in the back just because why not. And big thanks to Andy D for helping with the captures on this one. It's been a very busy week with Saturn as well. Now moving over to Banjo-Kazooie, this is another game that sees remarkable improvement in the overall frame pacing and fluidity of the gameplay. And in a second part to this, I will talk about the Banjo-Tooie 60 frame patch. I just wanted to go again through original games on this test just to see what it would do with no other improvements. And as we actually get into the gameplay, everything is just so smooth. The camera movements, the animation, you can just see a fluidity in this footage that you would not see if you were just playing the stock speed core. That's the fun in this. It's the same game that you know, love, and remember, just played faster. Now of course I know that in software emulation you can up the clock speeds as well, but you're getting that Nintendo 64 look and feel here with all the VI implementations with a higher clock speed across the processors on the Nintendo 64. And honestly, who wouldn't want that? The best part is, even though the clock speeds are increased across all of the different implementations, as far as sound is concerned, it's still the same speed, the same pitch, and the same quality you would expect out of the stock core. So go ahead and listen to the audio of Banjo-Kazooie for like 30 seconds or so, but come right back because I've got a lot more games to show you that have some massive improvements on the newest Turbo core. But the great part is the Banjo-Kazooie soundtrack is extremely good as well. Sounds and plays exactly like you would expect, but you just get a better frame rate, and that is a win all the way across the board. And this was not an easy task either. All of the builds in Core, as Robert said, took some days to get through. Basically, Core will lay out all of the different pathing for the FPGA chip and how all of the logic goes in there. This was the best build out of all of them. It is automated, but there is a little bit of very strange sort of luck involved in this to get the best build. So the fact that this works and works so well, definitely thank Robert down below in the comments. But I did want to put one patch game in this video just to talk about how it's running, because I know every single person would ask, and that is the 60 frame per second version of Super Mario 64. And if you can't tell already, this is a smoother image than you're ever going to see out of real Nintendo 64 hardware or the original Nintendo 64 Core Speed Core itself. This is just so nice to see. Now unfortunately, this is still a little bit problematic on the Core, and I believe a little bit problematic on real hardware as well. It is still something that is in development, but you'll see here as Mario jumps out of this green pipe at the beginning, you've never seen footage that smooth of this game. And hopefully as the work continues, you might see getting further into this game being a possibility. But as Mario does that triple jump, the fluidity in the image, I don't have to put a frame counter up, you can instantaneously tell just how much better it truly is. And there's a lot of different patches for a lot of different Nintendo 64 games that basically allow you to have a better frame rate, and people modifying and decompiling the games to be able to rebuild them as well. You'll see here in this game, if it does drop frames, it does drop the internal speed of the game. There's two ways that games can handle frame rate drops. They can either slow down or they can get a little bit choppy in the visuals. The physics in this game are obviously tied to the frame rate, so when you do lose the frames, everything basically slows to a crawl. But it is still a fun test. Now because this is just a for fun core, if a game does freeze, that's just how it's going to be. It's not really going to be patched up. This is just a little bonus. You'll see here in just a moment as Mario runs into one of these rolling balls, the core is just going to hang right there. This can happen on real hardware as well. I did ask around, but it's still fun to see just what we're getting out of a 60 frame per second patch out of Super Mario 64. But you hit that boulder and that is all she wrote. Now moving on to Perfect Dark, this is another game that sees massive improvements on the Turbo Core. Right now we're on the Turbo Core, and I will tell you in just a moment when we move back to the stock core, but look at how this motion moves. Look at the fluidity. Watch the chopper undulate back and forth. Just get a sense in your eye and in your mind of how the overall flow of this footage is moving, because in just a moment we're going to switch over and see how that ship goes through that little corridor in red there. It was very smooth. Looks like it might be getting close to 30 frames per second. And now we're going to move over to the stock core in the exact same clip. You can instantaneously see this footage is choppier, the cadence isn't as smooth, the transitions are a little bit rougher, and as this chopper turns, you can see that it's running at like maybe 12 to 14 frames per second. And now as we move back over to the Turbo Core, everything again just speeds up. Now this is not a playable section of Perfect Dark, so honestly if it doesn't run at a better frame rate, it doesn't really matter, but it is still an improvement and one that you can instantaneously see by eye alone without a frame counter. As we actually get into the Carrington Institute here and just walk around, you can see how smooth everything is. Pay attention to the camera turns. We're not really going to be fighting anybody. This is just kind of showing you how much smoother it is. As we walk along walls, as we open doors, as we pan the camera, there's a fluidity in this footage that you're not going to get out of the stock core and the stock game. And again, there are different patches you can apply to make this even better, but this is still just the stock experience. But as we navigate around and we turn, this is getting close to the feel of 60 frames per second in spots. Obviously, it's not pushing the engine to the limit, but if we go into one of these tunnels here with this little robotic ball, as it does all these screen space effects, doing that kind of fisheye lens look, this is an area that would definitely make the frame rate chug because it was doing a lot. Now it's smooth, and you can even see it in the gun animations. As that slider comes back, it has a sense of smoothness that you're not used to seeing within a stock Nintendo 64, and these are all just great things. People are going to be playing the Turbo Core all the time. and I know you're going to ask me which core I would recommend you play games on. Play them on the turbo core until they break, or if they don't break, then you're good to go. The nice part is the saves are transportable across the turbo core and the standard core, so I would for the most part just use the turbo core as the de facto core, and if you run into any issues, then just switch back over. Now, taking a look at Conquer here, you can get some improved frame rates in this game as well. This is one that isn't perfectly playable on the core due to technical reasons. It's going to freeze, and it will still continue to freeze in the turbo core. People are playing around to see if the freezing is less persistent, but you should expect it still to freeze. But the nice part is when you actually get in-game and in-engine, you're going to see another improvement in the overall frame rate. And I think that Conquer had one of the better frame rates for late-game Nintendo 64 titles, but honestly, getting more frames out of it's always going to be a great thing. And it is something that I can't really show you on video, but the sensation of control on the turbo core is just better. You're getting more frames, you're getting more response out of your button inputs, and even though Conquer just fell there to basically his death if this was a real world scenario, it is still an improvement. And the next couple of games I'm going to show you, I will indicate when, but I consider them to become playable on the turbo core, where I really wouldn't want to play them on the stock Nintendo 64 core based upon how hard the frame rate truly chugs. But you'll see here in the cutscenes, not only is this a very fun look and pushing the Nintendo 64 hardware to its limit, it just runs better on the turbo core, and honestly, that's just something nobody will complain about, and that is the fun of this. It is all of the feature set of the Nintendo 64 core, just with an improved clock speed on some of the chips, and that, my friend, is a very positive thing. Now, moving over to Turok 2, this is a game that I do not like to play on real Nintendo 64 hardware, because it becomes an absolute slideshow. Turok 2 and Turok 3 pushed the hardware to its absolute limits, and almost felt in Turok 3's instance at least that it should have been held over to the GameCube in my opinion. That explosion will definitely lower the frame rate a little bit, but if you're on real hardware, that explosion feels like it's basically almost freezing the real hardware until the frame rate picks back up. In the turbo core, you're just going to get a better experience, and I would consider it a playable experience. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think, but the Turok games after the original just felt like they were not optimized enough for Nintendo 64 hardware. And don't forget, some of the games we're testing do have high resolution mode as well, and you're going to get a better experience in those games because the high resolution mode would take the frame rate down even further. So having more processing speed and horsepower on the turbo core is going to help bridge that gap, but it is not a permanent fix as far as getting a 60 frames per second out of it. You're going to get a better performing core, but it's not going to solve absolutely everything, so don't think that's what the case is. But you'll see here, even in the combat, the frame rate held up so much better, as we have two enemies on screen in dark with all these screen space effects and the pseudo real-time lighting. We're just getting a smooth playing Turok 2, and that's something that the Turok series absolutely needs and benefits so much from this core actually becoming what I would consider playable. Don't take that the wrong way. Don't go down in the comments below and tell me I don't like Turok. I enjoy all of the games, but honestly, they really did just stretch the Nintendo 64 to the limit, and here in the new core, you're getting such a better performance. You will see even here where we have that real-time lighting bouncing down the wall, the frame rate is keeping up. It is not perfect, but it's so much better, and that is the great takeaway on Turok 2. It becomes a better playing experience with so much smoother frame rate, and I don't know what this enemy was doing right here. The AI in this game can still be incredibly stupid, and he was just walking straight into a wall, which makes it easy to shoot, and even though the frame rate still dips with all of the effects, it is still better than you would expect, and that's all we really want out of a turbo core. Now, moving over to Legacy of Darkness, this is a game that when you turn it to high resolution mode, you get a crisper image, but you also get a ton of frame rate dips. If you don't play the turbo core, if you didn't have an expansion pack in your Nintendo 64, I would recommend playing this game at low resolution mode because you're going to get the frame rate out of the actual engine. But with the turbo core, you get the best of both worlds. You get the high resolution graphics, and you also get the frame rate. That is what we want because it looks better in high res, and being able to actually play at a playable frame rate just makes the experience overall so much better. and I will cut back to some of the other footage on the stock core so you can see just the difference. But as we get Cornell here and control of him moving around this ship, just watch all of this hallway animations. The animation of throwing out that magic attack is just so smooth. All of the jumping around, you can just tell that this is running so well. So pay attention to the cadence here, and as we move back over to the stock core, you're going to see that while it isn't the worst thing in the world, you can immediately tell the difference in fluidity. This footage had the 480p mode on, but otherwise it is the stock speeds on all of the clocks, and it's just not as smooth. I wouldn't classify this area as unplayable, but later in the game it truly can chug. But with the turbo core, you can just tell in the footage how smooth this is, and it just makes combat all the more fun. I would say the combat in Legacy of Darkness is probably my least favorite part of the game. The sense of exploration and platforming is really where I've loved this title, but getting a better combat situation out with a higher frame rate just makes it all the more fun. And again, if you've never played this game before, don't believe what the internet tells you. They'll say these aren't good Castlevania games. They are some of my favorite of all time, and even the in-engine cutscenes could drop frames on the high resolution mode, and that seems to be basically taken care of here on the turbo core. So definitely check out Castlevania Legacy of Darkness on turbo. The original game does not have high resolution mode, so it's basically just going to be stock. You're not really going to see much of an improvement there, because that's the thing with the turbo core. The games that improves, it improves. Some games just aren't going to see any benefit from it. Now moving over to Star Wars Pod Racer, this is another title that you're going to see a better screen motion, and in a fast-paced racing game that definitely is going to matter. It's not the most fundamental change compared to something like GoldenEye or Perfect Dark, but it is another game that definitely benefits from having extra frames. And that really is the thing. If you can get extra frames out of the core, why not? It's going to improve basically everything and break basically nothing. And that is always the plus side of these things. And it's so great that Robert was able to bring us one more turbo core while he buttons up all of the work. And if you're going to wonder when this core is going to be an update all and the stock core, I think it's going to be soon. And I will have a full core setup guide when that comes out, because if you haven't been testing the unofficial cores, I know you're going to want that. And leave me a comment down below and tell me, have you been testing these along with the videos, or have you just been watching the videos? Because I would say 9 out of 10 commenters have not yet played any Nintendo 64 on the actual MiSTer FPGA, and I can't wait for all of you guys to be able to use Update All and actually get to that situation. But again, as we traverse the world here in the game racing around, it's smooth, it's fluid, it's pretty. The controls are for the most part good, which is to say this game can be a little finicky in the control department until you learn it. But otherwise, it's just another game that's so much fun to play on the turbo core, and definitely one I recommend you check out. But tell me down below, of the games you've seen so far, which one are you most excited about getting a better frame rate out of? For me personally, I would say it's Perfect Dark, because on real hardware or the stock core, that game just gets so slow in instances that it definitely drives me a little bit nuts. But the best part is we have one more game to show you, and the one that I think is the most fundamentally improved over any single Nintendo 64 game when it comes to improved frame rates. But if you want to play Pod Racer today, definitely check it out. You're going to get a smoother experience, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the game that I think becomes infinitely more playable is going to be Turok 3. This is also one of the strangest intro sequences of any game I've ever played on Nintendo 64 or not. But as we actually get into Turok 3, I do not like playing this on real Nintendo 64 hardware. I do not like playing it on the regular Nintendo 64 FPGA Core on MiSTer. It is too slow, it is too unwieldy, it is just not a good experience. Turok 3 definitely felt like something that should have been held over to the GameCube so they could have actually had new hardware and better performance. But on the turbo core, I would 100% say Turok 3 is a very fast, very playable experience, where I would say on the stock core or real hardware, just don't bother, it's going to drive you nuts. But that is just me. If you have a different opinion, you can totally leave it down below. But with all of the effects, all of the real-time lighting, all of the different rain particles coming down, everything is just holding together. And I would say personally, Turok 3 has the most improvement of any game in the turbo core, and that's just awesome, because what is here is very inventive. This feels a little bit like Half-Life 2 before Half-Life 2 would actually be released. It seems to straddle the border generationally between a Nintendo 64 game and a GameCube game, both in graphics as well as the overall gameplay design. Turok 3 is a great game, but it's not a great experience outside of the turbo core, and that's why I'm so happy this core now exists in an improved format as Robert wraps up work on Nintendo 64 on MiSTer FPGA. This is giving a new life to a game that I want to love, but I just can't. I'm not going to sit down and take my Turok 3 cartridge off the shelf, put it into my Nintendo 64 and play it. I'm going to get annoyed with it. I'm going to get annoyed with the frame rate and controls because of the frame rate, and I'm just going to move on to something else. Now with the Turbo Core, I'm definitely going to get a new playthrough of Turok 3 in, and that is always an awesome time. You'll see here in the cutscenes as well, it's just a smoother, better experience. And I know I didn't put a frame rate counter up for this entire video, and I know that does upset some of you. I don't do it just to be a pain in the butt. I do it because I love talking about the motion, the cadence, and the vibe. I want you to get the feeling of what you're looking at and not just keep one eye on the top left hand corner looking at a digit, because I could tell you numbers all day long. I want you to get the look and feel of what's going on here. And as far as Turok 3 is concerned, this is fundamentally just so much better until we fall to our death. But that's the current situation with the MiSTer FPGA Core. Robert was on a 2-week vacation, and he gave us a new Turbo Core on that vacation. So big thanks to him, but honestly, I think he needs to re-look up the definition of vacation in a dictionary, because it must mean something different in Germany than it does in the US. But run, don't walk to the MiSTer FPGA Discord, go to Test Builds, download the newest Turbo Core, and start playing, because it is epic. And if there's other games you want to see tested on this core, leave me a comment down below. Share that. Happy Sunday. Bye-bye.